welcome to episode 107 of Dope Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your other co-host, Mike.
It's been a really musically exciting week here,
Indeed.
Mike. I had a gig earlier this afternoon, and I rushed back to get to the podcast, so I'm not used to playing music in the middle of the day.
Yeah, and here you are looking all snazzy in your nifty shirt there. It's a button-down shirt.
That's right.
Looking really sharp.
So I was busy doing music since the morning time, and earlier this week, we got a chance to do another interview.
Yeah, we got to talk to the composer, Niklas Sävlöv, the Swedish composer, who we spoke about, I forget which episode it was, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Okay. It was his first and fifth symphonies, and we really liked them a lot. We got in touch with him with Facebook. I think he liked the... He actually listened to the podcast and liked what we said about it and commented on it. So we set up an interview with him. He was very gracious, and it was a fantastic interview as well. He was really talkative and had a lot of things to say. It was really great.
Yeah, I like his whole approach to music. It's very broad, and I think maybe it's from his background. He started out playing organ, but not reading music. So he was improvising and using his ear to try to learn and play Mozart pieces,
which I think is the best way. I think I think music should be like language. You learn to speak before you learn to read. Right. You know what I mean? So reading should come later.
And so we talked about his piano playing, his composing, now his symphony writing, and also some of these interesting things he's done a little bit outside of the sort of mainstream of classical music as well. So I think you'll enjoy this interview a lot, and we'll put that up this week on Thursday morning, Japan time. That'll be Wednesday evening, U.S. time. So if you want to check that out, look for interview 7 with Niklas Sävlöv.
Yeah, one of the things that we mentioned when he contacted us, he let us know that he thinks of himself mainly as a pianist and not as a composer. So we know him as a composer, of course, because of the recording. And that was what made me want to talk to him. I said, there's more to this guy than we thought. If you're interested in knowing what goes into a symphony or what's in there, he details that a bit too. We asked him about the 2 works that we talked about on the podcast, and he filled us in on his inspirations and for certain sections and things like that. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, I think you'll find this interview very interesting.
Yeah, check that out. So that'll be coming up on Thursday, Japan time, before the next episode.
And of course, it'll be up forever, so you can listen to
it out anytime.
10 years from now if you like. Okay, there's more news.
Oh, we have news.
Yeah.
News.
Hyperion Records, my favorite record labels. At least they have all my favorite artists on it. This week, they're a British label, independent British label, but not anymore. They were picked up by a Universal Music Group, and they're going to stay independent under that umbrella. I don't know what that means.
What does it mean?
But I'm hoping that one of the things this deal means is that Hyperion albums will be available for streaming. One of the big problems, I want to talk more about Hyperion Records on these podcasts. I still do. And we're going to have another one coming up in about 2 weeks. The amazing Stephen Hoff recording of Federico Mompo's Musica Caeda, which I've been saving for Easter. I should have done it really earlier because it's really great. But you can only sample them from the Hyperion site. They don't have their music on streaming, and hopefully this will mean it'll finally go there. But I don't know yet, so I can't say.
It's one of the few really big labels left that isn't on streaming.
It's not a very big label, but it is like a well-known label. Yeah, major classical label.
Sony held out for a long time with a lot of their Japan releases, but now you can hear most of those.
And that's really bad because they have major clout, that label. They have the whole Columbia Records collection, which goes back for more than 50 years, I think.
Yeah. But if Hyperion got on there, then it would be easier for our listeners to check out all the recordings we talk about. So we'll have to see what develops. Then we'll keep you updated if we see some of those recordings appear on the streaming platforms.
Right.
So before we get into the music we're going to talk about this evening, I want to remind all of our listeners that in the episode description you can find links to Spotify and Apple Music for all the music we're going to talk about, speaking of streaming. And also at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. You can get all the music in one place on Deezer, our favorite CD quality streaming platform. They also have podcasts, so you can follow us there, get the podcast and all the music in one place. If you prefer, look us up, Adult Music Podcast on Deezer. And if you can't see the full description or the recording list or the links don't work, because on some places where, the podcast feed goes to, they don't always show up neatly spaced out and the links don't always work. But everything always works very easily on our host site, Podbean, Podbean.com. You can always come over there. The Apple podcast is always easy to follow as well. Now, if you enjoy the podcast, please do follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a friend, too. We get more listeners if you recommend our podcast to someone else who likes music. And if you just take a moment, give us a ranking or write a short review, that'll also help us get listed in the browsing categories and the recommendations there, and that helps us get new listeners as well. Come over and follow us on our Facebook page to get extra info. More new releases throughout the week. Put up a bunch this week as well. And you can also see the interaction we get with some of the artists. We got a couple likes last week from our piano artists there. And you can also leave a message or comment there on Facebook. And if you want to get in touch directly by email, you can do that as well with any comments or questions. We'd be happy to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. And we're also trying to share our audience and get more listeners from other related podcasts. So we got a couple other ones to recommend to you. The first one is Tom Gauker's Something Came from Baltimore, and he's got a jazz, blues, and R&B interview podcast. He's always got a lot of well-known musicians on there every week, so check that out. Famous Interviews and Neon Jazz from Joe Domino, who interviews artists, musicians, and writers. We've got Same Difference, Two Jazz Fans, One Jazz Standard. It looks at several versions of the same jazz standard each week. They play little pieces of each version, discuss the history of the original and the different versions. And you can find those links at the end of the podcast description there. Also, at the end of the audio of this podcast episode, there'll be little promo spots from each one of those. So please stay on to the end and listen to what they're all about.
Okay, so let's get into the music for this week. First, we are celebrating an anniversary. These musical anniversaries are a big thing in classical music, and it's a nice thing because it makes us look back at composers who may not be being performed as much as they otherwise ought to be. It becomes like a certain year. And this year we have the anniversary of the 400th anniversary of the death of two Renaissance composers. One of them is a very well-known one, William Byrd, Byrd, and another one maybe not so well-known to you, Thomas Weelkes. But I actually know of this composer too. He, when I was learning what tone painting was in a music class, they used a piece of his about Queen Elizabeth as the purest of virgins, and it had all these great images of these deities, these minor deities running up a hill to meet her, and it had all these like sort of tone painted things. It's really cute. It's not on this album, unfortunately. It would have been fun to talk about, but we have other interesting stuff. Anyway, the album in question is called Tom and Will. Weelkes and Byrd, 400 Years. This is performed by the King's Singers. They are the choral group, and the accompanying instrumental group is Fretwork, who play viols. So that's what you're going to hear on this album. It's on the Signum Classics label, which is from Great Britain. Okay, so Byrd and Weelkes both died in 1623, 400 years ago this year. They were from different generations, though. They weren't like me and Russ or anything like that. Byrd died when he was in his 80s. And Weelkes died at the younger age of 47.
Ooh.
It's like almost half his age. Yeah. The two of them also had wildly contrasting characters, as you might imagine, given Weelkes that Weelkes was 47 years old when he died. Weelkes has been singled out for being the most insubordinate member of an unruly choir at Chichester. Oh, those choir boys. Call the police. He was admonished for being drunk in public in 1613. Yeah, some things never change, I guess. Right. And was, along with 10 other choirmen, reprimanded for failure to attend cathedral services. Oh, that would make the priest a little angry.
Yeah.
Why you're in the choir if you're not going to the cathedral service? Yeah, they sound more like a gang, to be honest. I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, Weelkes was finally dismissed as organist and choirmaster in 1617 for his notorious drunkenness and outrageous blaspheming.
Oh.
Now you got to keep in mind, it isn't like today where you want to serve your church and you go and you sort of, do some music and you're respectful. This was a major position to hold, and it didn't really matter. Everybody would have been Christian at the time in England, right? But you wanted these posts because they gave you status and they were high paying as well.
Yeah.
But he didn't really seem to be able to settle down. He did remain in his post as a singing man, though. He was in the choir. Weelkes was unreformed the remainder of his life, and it was noted that he continued to utter curses and oaths that both profaned the service and outraged those who were present. I think I read something that the Surrealists or the Dadaists used to interrupt church services in Paris at the beginning of the 20th century in much the same way. Anyway, he ended his days, this is Thomas Weelkes, in London and died in the house of a friend. And the friend, ironically, was named Henry Drinkwater. How did things like that happen? Anyway, William Byrd, on the other hand, was a different type. He remained faithful to his Catholic faith in mostly Protestant England at the time, until his death, and can be found in contemporary court documents petitioning the rights of fellow Catholics. So Byrd was a good guy. He stood up for his fellow Catholics. He had high status in society, was immune from persecution because of that high status. He attracted the patronage of some of the greatest personages of his time, and I think that includes Queen Elizabeth, who will, not the one that recently died, but the one from the Renaissance who Shakespeare was... Byrd and Shakespeare, incidentally, were contemporaries, so I don't know that they knew each other, though. Anyway, we hear their work side by side on this album, and it's an album with a lot of variety on it. So if you like Renaissance music, it's really fun. You have some serious tunes, you get some more fun tunes, and then there is one or two sacred ones, although this is mostly a secular album. All right, we start out with a sacred work. William Byrd, Praise Our Lord, All Ye Gentiles. And this is what's known as a sacred anthem. So this, and there's another sacred work to bookend the mostly secular work on this album. There are one or two other quasi-religious ones, but you could think of this as a secular sandwich with sacred bread. Anyway, this isn't one of those overpowering choral recordings. Like sometimes when you hear like a Renaissance mass, the voices just come in and really, with all this grandeur, they just kind of hit you. No, not here. This is, it sounds like one voice to a part. It would have to be. There are only 5 of them, I think. There are viols, and it falls gently on the ear. This is a really Renaissance quality that you see in movies. This kind of everything is gentle. People are wandering around, and you have the quiet viols in the background. I'd characterize the conjunct legato vocals and strings as creamy sounding. You think?
One word that just keeps coming up in my notes with this one is movement. So rather than being hit with sort of walls of voices, you're getting all these interweaving lines, which are really interesting. And that was a lot of the joy to follow for me, the constant, movement of those voice lines. Yeah,
they kind of weave around sort of like spaghetti, right. You kind of... And the lines also are very conjunct, which is the opposite of disjunct. Disjunct line would be one that leaps, like say eighths or just wide intervals, whereas conjunct would go to the second, the third, and then come back down again.
Yes, so they're smooth.
Yeah, smooth. Think of Beethoven's Ode to Joy. That's Freude, that's a conjunct line.
And the result is you get a lot of really interesting passing harmonies that come up through here that I found intriguing too. Yeah, they're, as always, right, in the Renaissance, because they didn't nail down the classical era's what's acceptable as harmony yet. Let's move on. William Byrd has the second track, If Women Could Be Fair. Oh, incidentally, there are 6 vocalists in the King's Singers on this album. And here we're hearing Christopher Brewerton as the soloist. This is called a consort song, If Women Could Be Fair. And the lyric warns of colluding with ladies of the night. Ooh. And that's quite a change from Praise Our Lord, Ye Gentiles. Boy, they really just went into the other end of the moral spectrum there. Anyway, the text is by Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford. He lived from 1550 to 1604. And if you look at the text, it's rather hard to pull the meaning out of. It has a lot of these Renaissance idiosyncrasies of language. It's sung monophonically, meaning like a song, right? And features an accompanying pizzicato viol. The vocals are falsetto. That's Brewerton is a countertenor. And the plucked accompaniment is all produced by viols. You'll kind of hear something that sounds like a
like a lute, maybe a heavy lute, but no, these are all viols being plucked in harmony. For the third verse, there are a lot of voices. They're scattered, and the harmony has appeared. So it starts monophonically, everybody's singing the same note, and then the harmony develops, and then it gets scattered at the end. Very interesting composition. Track 3, we hear Thomas Weelkes for the first time. Say, dear, when will your frowning leave? This features Edward Button on countertenor and Jonathan Howard as the bass, and they are the soloists. And the theme of melancholy in a madrigal, which is what this is. Madrigals came from Italy. They're a style that was imported. And Weelkes made the madrigal his domain in English music. This one has weepy viols accompanying the equally weepy vocalists. Each line continues a different vocal arrangement, the first two solo, the final in harmony for the whole ensemble. So there's a lot of ear candy in the arrangements that made by the King Singers and Fretwork for this tune, and a lot of them. Next we have Thomas Weelkes again, Like Two Proud Armies. The lyrics of this one liken the courtship of a man and woman to battle. And this was pretty common with Weelkes, and it became common in the Baroque era as well. Courtship is like a battle. The arrangement is playful and charming. Harmonies are generally vertical, but scatter as the piece goes on. Track 5, Thomas Weelkes again, Pavane number 3, an instrumental for viols only. This is legato, has that creamy sound, very conjunct, and very sad, as this type of ensemble and dance often are. At this point, I should mention this album is beautifully recorded. And to be honest, that's often the case with choral or viol albums. You can get really close to them with the mics and not be surprised by their sound level. It's got a real intimacy to it as well. Track 6, Thomas Weelkes, Thule, the period of cosmography. It sounds kind of like a progressive rock album title. Anyway, this one is according to the booklet, a poetical, musical tour de force. I'll take their word for it. Thule is a metaphorical term for a distant place beyond the known world. But Weelkes describes it with a reference to the Icelandic volcano Hekla that appears in the second or third line. The general theme of the poem has been debated, but seems to be that nothing can be more strange than those induced by the unsteady progress of love. Now, I took a look at these lyrics and really couldn't make head or tails of their meaning, so I'll just take their word for it. It's all in English, by the way. It has a rather playful, bouncing, separate entry of the various vocals. Tones are staccato, so all of the syllables are discernible in the polyphonic texture. To keep up interest, the vocal entries and approach to sound is varied in each verse. There's some great chord changes in this work, too. This is one of Russ's favorite types of things, especially when chords lean into a new section of the verse in which the texture becomes more blended and sonorous as opposed to scattered and dancing. Track 7, Thomas Weelkes again. What Joy So True. We have soloists in this one, 3 of them, Edward Button, Julian Gregory, and Patrick Dunacci. I don't know that I said that last name right, but we'll see. It's a concert song that could be described as a verse anthem more suited to the church. It starts with the countertenor singing solo. That's going to be Edward Button, accompanied by viols. He has beautiful phrasing and vowel sounds. I really enjoyed his approach. The second verse is sung by the ensemble. The tenor, Julian Gregory, sings the second verse. And I like this approach of changing the voice for different verses. It sounds like it's being handed off, sort of like a relay race. The ensemble always repeats the last 2 lines, and Patrick Dunacci comes in for a countertenor duet for the third verse. The fourth and final verse is sung by the 3 previously heard soloists together, and probably along with the choir. Nice arranging here. Track 8, In Nomine a 4 by Thomas Weelkes. The In Nomine section of the Benedictus part of the Mass was detached as a separate work in the Renaissance era and copied in a variety of instrumental sources, and became this composition template. This is the booklet that I'm reading from, for generations of composers. So students, I guess, studying composition and composers themselves up to the time of Henry Purcell. Weelkes' 3 settings, we're going to hear 3 of them. This is the first. Demonstrate the variety of ideas which can be inspired by a single tune. This is a lighter texture for the viols. We hear the higher ones only at the beginning, with the lower instruments playing more softly to allow the higher voices to float freely. It's a very nice composition. Track 8. Moving on to track 9, we hear from William Byrd again. And we're setting up kind of a dual track situation here, which I'll explain in a moment. William Byrd, Ye Sacred Muses, and Patrick Dunacci is the soloist here, countertenor. This piece is an elegy written for the death of Thomas Tallis, who was Byrd's mentor, colleague, and friend for much of his life. The viols are deep, closely harmonized, and have that mournful feel we often get from a consort. Dunacci's voice contrasts well with the other countertenors, Edward Button. His tone is more diffuse at the edges and brings a completely different quality, really. So if you think countertenor voices are just high and sound the same, try to compare these two guys. They actually sound very different. I'm enjoying the variety not only of the material, but of vocal coloring of this album. Okay, track 10, we get a contemporary composer, James Macmillan, commenting sort of on William Byrd's work with his music. It's called Ye Sacred Muses. It's a contemporary reimagining of Byrd's elegy. Like Byrd, Macmillan is Catholic. He is in fact very Catholic, because I think just about every work that he composes has something to do with Catholicism. So it's nice having one Catholic composer honoring another. The haunting last words of Byrd's elegy, which is Tallis is dead and music dies. Ooh, devastating. Anyway, they're changed by Macmillan to Will, meaning William Byrd, is dead and music dies. And despite this being set for viols, Macmillan sets them to sound more like a contemporary ensemble. You'll hear this right away. The arrangement of the vocals is very much of the late 20th, early 21st century. Harmonies are less, probably sonorous isn't the right word, but they don't like all blend and sort of in the way that the close harmony of the Renaissance does. These are all sort of, there are harsher harmonies here, but they're never the point of being unpleasant. The various sections show a lot of variety of harmonic spacing and instrumental technique. They can seem otherworldly to our more contemporary ears in the context of this album. There are a lot of solos dispersed in the piece for the singers, each taking his in an understated way, wanting to blend in with the texture. There's an interesting climbing harmony towards the end in the viols in the 6th minute, and a lovely resolution at the end. But these compositions do stand out on this album. The harmony is totally different. Anyway, track 11, back to Thomas Weelkes, another In Nomine. This is an instrumental work. And after that Macmillan piece, this sounds like another era, which it is. But it's more calm, let's say. The harmonies are less adventurous, in keeping with their time. It's mournful and pretty, like the previous In Nomine. And track 12, we have Thomas Weelkes' Hark, All Ye Lovely Saints Above. This is one of Weelkes' most popular madrigals, and it has fa-la-las in it, following each verse. And they're pretty characteristic of his more popular pieces. It's happy and cheerful, especially due to the fa-la-las. It's got a festive, dancey quality to the vocal rhythms. There's a little amusing tone painting on the words, Why Weep Ye? Okay, so I mentioned that Thomas Weelkes, I learned about tone painting mostly from Thomas Weelkes, or word painting. It's illustrated by the ensemble, where the words are stretched out in a heavier, mournful manner when they sing the words, Why Weep Ye? You'll hear this right away. It really stands out. But the mood is only temporary for these words, and then the dancing resumes. It's pretty funny. So that's track 12. Let's make sure you hear that. Track 13, Thomas Weelkes, Death Hath Deprived Me. This is an elegy composed to the memory of Thomas Morley, and it's one of the highlights of this album. I like the way death is isolated from the rest of the text at the beginning by the music. Slow, mournful polyphonic setting with some beautifully blended harmonies and some rhythmic variation in the middle. Track 14, we get our second composition by a contemporary composer. Now, Weelkes, in the previous piece, Death Hath Deprived Me, is mourning the death of his, I don't know if it was his teacher, but a composer he knew, Thomas Morley. And here, Roderick Williams is commenting on that. This is a contemporary reimagining of Weelkes' elegy. It's called Death Be Not Proud, after the, I think, the John Donne poem. No elegies survive for Byrd and Weelkes themselves, so the two on this album stand in their absence. Interesting, huh? Nobody wrote for Byrd and Weelkes. That's sad. Anyway, the harmony in this is given to the viols at the beginning, make this sound like a Renaissance-era piece. So you wouldn't know this was a contemporary composition until a minute and 36 seconds in, when we start hearing the harmony straying from would have been expected from the Renaissance era. It does revert back to Renaissance-era harmony at certain points. The vocals start at the 2-minute and 29-second mark, and now we're squarely in the 21st century with some of the jarring harmonies we hear, like in the 5th minute. This really stands out due to the harmony, like the Macmillan piece. The rhythm gets more jumpy, and the various vocal registers are scattered, coming together on Why Swellest Thou Then? At 6 minutes and 16 seconds, the smooth, buttery Renaissance-style harmonies are heard again on the viols. And here, from the words, one short sleep past, the vocals are smooth. They're Renaissance-like, too. Until the word eternally, when they leap back into the 21st century again. The end of the piece is haunting and weird in a rather enjoyable way. This is a pretty interesting composition. It was rather clever. Really kept you on your toes. You really didn't know what was coming. Track 15, Thomas Weelkes, the third and final in nomine of the album. We're in the comfortable, smooth Renaissance-era sound with conjunct melodic lines. I kind of like the way they reset us back into the sound world of the Renaissance with these in nomine works after the two contemporary compositions. Track 16, William Byrd, Who Made Thee Hob? Christopher Brewerton and Nick Ashby are the soloists. This is a consort song, which is akin to the madrigal, but it has voices, well, they all had voices viols together. It's an English invention, the consort song. This one is a short, boisterous dialogue between two rustic characters about the pursuit of a maiden called Silvana, ending with a trail of protests which say, yet love I must or else I die. There's a Shakespearean, like, drunken type rhythm and melody to this. I think of Purcell's Fairy Queen when the fairies are pinching one of the characters and he's drunk and kind of sings off key. We get a little bit of that too here. It's very catchy. Both singers are baritones, and I think Christopher Brewerton is the more drunken sounding of the two. The other one contrasts a bit. Track 17, Byrd, This Sweet and Merry Month of May. Ooh, coming soon, springtime. This is a madrigal, and it's one of the few written by William Byrd. A very happy welcoming of spring, and it's bright and appealing. And if you remember Josquin's El Grillo, a personal favorite of mine, the cricket, it kind of has that catchy quality too. Track 17. Track 18, William Byrd. This is two tunes, Browning and The Leaves Be Green. Browning is a monophonic folk tune with the words, the leaves be green, the nuts be brown, they hang so high, they will not come down. And that's it. We just hear those words repeated in different registers by different singers and singing solo. So next we have the viols providing support for the monophonic tone with their slow but melodic accompaniment. And we hear it in the bass first, and the vocals don't appear again until 2.5 minutes later. And the two-line lyric to Browning is repeated, as I said, in different voices. Track 19, William Byrd, Alack, When I Look Back, featuring Julian Gregory as the soloist. It's a consort song that could be described as a verse anthem, and the lyric ponders the follies of youth. This is rather heavy and sad, and it's lamenting lyrics. It's sung by a solo voice that's not indicated. No, it is indicated. Julian Gregory, I already said that. Verses are ended by the ensemble of voices singing in harmony. Finally, we reach the final track, William Byrd, O Lord, make thy servant Elizabeth. So a more sacred work. It's a prayer for the health and well-being of his principal patron, the Queen. This has a beautiful full harmony of the sacred style, really different from what we've heard so far. This is really full on. Some pretty interesting harmony from the 49-second mark that should stand out. Rather surprising to this work on this album. This smooths out as the composition goes until we get a very smoothly realized Amen at the end. This is an immediately appealing album that's an ideal introduction to the music from this era and to the music of these two composers. There are a variety of compositions, as I said, some done in a lively, playful style, while others catch the mournful quality of the darker compositions. The recording is excellent and completely transparent, with middle voices easy to pick out of the texture, I guess depending on your equipment. And the arrangements and programming of the works are done in a way to keep the ear engaged with timbral, rhythmic, and stylistic variety. It's an excellent way to celebrate these two composers' anniversaries, and we will be hearing from William Byrd again in a few weeks.
Oh, cool. I'm always up for Renaissance vocals. They always put me in a good mood.
Yeah.
I like this recording a lot. Most of all, as I mentioned, the interesting movement in the compositions. As you say, the lines of vocals don't have a lot of big leaps, so they sort of flow nicely, resulting in interesting harmony, but also the songs go in unexpected directions, so it's not predictable. Renaissance music has a rather unpredictable nature compared to, the Baroque, where usually you can logically figure out where things are going. Also, some of these tunes have a really joyful bounce in the rhythms, in the phrasings of the vocalists, so I liked that a lot. There's a sense of energy that comes through them. And then Fretwork's kind of sparse. Viols, the instrumentation is light, but the interesting timbres are nice to enjoy on those little instrumental pieces as well in the backing. So you get a little mixture, and as Mike mentioned, the programming, you get a little reset after the contemporary pieces too, and they stand out in contrast, make you think about things, from how music changed in these different periods, and you get some more of that modern harmony. But all in all, it lingers in your mind and makes you want to go hear it again. So yeah, I like this recording a lot.
I did too. So yeah, a good one for the anniversary. All right, next we have the seventh recording that we're going to talk about on this podcast from a composer that has become near and dear to us, mostly because his main researcher has also become near and dear to us. That's not really why. We like it because we like his music. So, but Daniel Bernardson, our friend and friend of the podcast, helps us with that a lot. And he actually visited us in Japan. So we
he visited us
and go out with him and discuss Wranitzky and his research with him. It was really interesting.
And he gave us the scores for this in advance, and I enjoyed using the scores as I listened to this. They were enlightening, and I believe the scores for this are also on the Wranitzky project page. So if you want to find scores for this or any other Wranitzky works, there's a lot of them there. And you can also hear our interview. That's interview number 3 if you search through our archive with Daniel and the conductor here, who's conducted all of these recordings on Naxos. We've done non-Naxos recordings with different ensembles, but that's Marek Štilec. And that's a really enlightening interview. We learned a lot about the music there. And the releases just keep coming, and we'll keep talking about them as they come out.
Yeah, this is volume 5 in the Naxos series, Orchestral Works. This one has a ballet called Das Listige Bauernmädchen, which translates as the cunning farmer girl. Look out for those farmer girls. And there are 2 other pieces, Vorstellungen and Quodlibet, Contradance. And this is performed by, of course, the Czech Chamber Philharmonic Orchestra, Pardubice, by Marek Štilec. And this is on the Naxos label. The notes in the booklet are by Daniel Bernardson.
Yes.
And I'll be quoting from them liberally because we really need to in order to understand some of the scenario here. It's a little, it's actually quite interesting. I wrote a reminder here. Wranitzky was born in the southern Moravian village of Neureich, which is today Nova Rys in the Czech Republic. So he's technically Czech, or I guess you could call him Bohemian from the time. I had completely forgotten that. So I'm glad that Daniel mentioned it again in the booklet. Anyway, he was a composer that was much, whose music was much loved by the Empress Marie-Thérèse, the second wife of Franz II, who was an important musical patron in Vienna at the turn of the 19th century, going into the 19th century. Anyway, her music collection has provided us a lot of Wranitzky's surviving works. That's how we know them. And the ballet Das Listige Bauernmädchen, which you're going to hear here, is one of them. Okay, the first 22 tracks on this album are the ballet. Don't worry, we're not going to go track by track through this one, as I think I can sum a lot of them up pretty quickly. Anyway, what this is, it was composed sometime between 1795 and 1805, so we're not really sure. That's after the death of Mozart, by the way. And that would be 1803 is a magic year in classical music. That was when Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica, premiered. So things were slowly changing after that. Anyway, there's no ballet libretto or scenario surviving for this work. But it turns out that Giovanni Paisiello's opera Il Matrimonio Inaspettato, or The Unexpected Marriage. I hate when that happens, don't you?
Yeah.
On the stage, it's okay, but in real life, no. 1779 was known as Das Listige Bauernmädchen in German translations. And the plots line up with what we hear in the ballet score. So we're guessing here, and I guess Daniel is guessing too, that this is in fact the story of this ballet. Basically, it's a self-made rags-to-riches farmer named Tulipano, has bought a marquisate, and he's made himself a marquis, and arranges a marriage between his son Giorgino and the Countess Olympia di Sarzana. Okay? But Giorgino loves Vespina, a wealthy neighboring farmer girl. You know, it's a good thing she was wealthy, because this would be a big problem if she wasn't. So she impersonates the Countess, so she's cunning, you see. She impersonates the Countess. Tulipano blesses the young couple, and when the real Countess arrives, Tulipano doesn't recognize her. She's outraged and has two of her squires challenge the father and son to a double duel. All right. I love ballet and opera, don't you? Anyway, Tulipano and his son are about to lose, but Vespina's servants come and chase the adversaries away. Tulipano marries his son to Vespina, then discovers the deception, and to remedy the Countess's offended honor, Tulipano offers his own hand in marriage to her. She accepts. This is a double marriage. Everybody's happy. I don't know. Anyway, but the Countess got the older guy. I hope she's happy with that. All right, so anyway, this starts out with a very rustic setting. Now, we're going to do something here that we haven't done before. We're going to give you a few, not many, musical samples from the recording. And we're going to start with this rustic setting that sets it all off. Let's listen. And there you have it. Energy in the recording is good, as you heard, as is the sound quality. Detail emerges. This recording has more of a matte finish to it than a glossy one. This is a sound that I associate with Middle and Eastern Europe. Remember we talked about the Superfon label and how they get that less glossy sound. This has a real rustic character to it and a triumphant ending to the cheerful overture. Next, we hear a series of lively dances, starting off the orchestra and really lifting our spirits. We get to track 6, and judging by Daniel's notes, this would be Giorgino's Serenade to Vespina, and he's apparently playing it on a guitar because there's a very pretty, I guess, guitar arpeggios that we hear. A really surprising change.
It's mandolin, right?
Oh, it's a mandolin.
Yeah.
Well, it could be a lute too. I'm not really sure. Is it a mandolin? You looked at the score,
yeah,
so
mandolin. Okay. That's a surprise, though.
It really is a surprise.
I
It's
a score there. Yeah.
It's accompanied by gentle pizzicati in the bass. And we have to hear this. Let's get a sample of that. Okay, I can imagine narrative happening over that. Pretty sound and a little unexpected given what we've heard in the first 5 tracks. And we get into some more narrative music, pretty what we expect of the time as the story goes on. In track 9, there's a march, and this heralds the arrival of the false Countess Vespina, according to Daniel's notes. It sounds pretty high-spirited, maybe echoing the comic quality of Vespina disguising herself as the Countess. There's also this really sad cello line here that I really enjoyed, and I want to give you this as a sample too. Okay. All right, we go on from there. There are a few more dances and narrative material. And when we get to track 16, we hear trumpets, and this is where the duel happens. In track 16, this is number 13 in the ballet itself. By the way, some of these ballet numbers are divided like 12, and then there's 12 and a half. The numbers don't always go the way the tracks go. So the trumpets herald the duel. The music sounds more urgent in track 16. And this particular section has less of a repetitive quality than the dancier sections. The dancier sections are really setting off the dancers on the stage, a chance to show what they can do. So they're very repetitive. But the more narrative sections sort of move the narrative forward a bit musically. The opening of track 17 is played entirely by winds, which is very characteristic of Wranitzky and a little unusual for the time, given the music of, say, Haydn and Mozart. It's got a bouncing rhythm that's really charming and not heard often over the wind ensemble. Okay, we have some more country dances. Track 19, we have a question and answer sort of quality to this melody. The answer is rather comical. The answer by the wind sounds like a kind of like a car horn honking to me. I like the feel of that particular track 19. In track 21, we get a moderate tempo which also has an appealing lilt to the melody, and I love the orchestration of this particular track. Finally, in track 22, a contradance. We're back to a rustic droning bass like we heard at the beginning. Has the sound brightened from the beginning of the piece? I don't know. Maybe I got used to the sound quality throughout, which is very good, I have to say. But I think it sounds like a little brighter at the end.
Yeah, I picked up a few things in this work that I really found quite interesting, and I was glad to have the score to look through. Just go back a little ways, a couple harmonic things that are really nice, because most of the keys are kind of what you imagine in the classical period. The different movements have kind of a logical progression of keys. But on track 12...
Oh, I skipped over this. We had talked about this. Yeah.
Number 9,
okay.
Catch the Surprise at the end. It's in the key of F, and right at the end, you're going to get a F7 chord with the E flat in it, and it really sticks out.
Yeah.
And so the next movement is in, B flat. So you've got your 5/7 chord, but you don't know that's coming. And after the gap, so it's kind of a little wake up nod. And I had to go back and make sure that I actually heard what I thought I heard. And then I looked in the score and I said, oh, yeah, that's a nice little kind of joke. I don't think I've heard that done quite in that way.
Yeah, that's the end of track 12 to the beginning of track 13.
Yeah. And there's one other really nice change. That's in track 19. Here you're in the last section of it, and you're in B flat major, and the last section of that work, which goes into like a 6/8 triplet feel. The previous part was in 2/4, and it goes from B flat to D major. So there's this real lifting and brightening effect before it goes, into those last sections. And so having the score there to confirm what I thought I was hearing in both of those spots were really interesting. But I liked this piece. It's got those great melodies everywhere that Wranitzky is really good at. He's such a great...
He's a good melodist.
Yeah, melodist. And also what's nice in here is the varied instrumentation. You get a lot of winds, but they're used differently in different places. There's a lot of really good bassoon parts, and the key changes, as I mentioned, and it's really quite rhythmic in these different dances, and getting different feelings and moods by changing up the time signatures and tempos throughout. So you really want to be watching what the story was to go with this music. But I imagine that it really pushed the story along with whatever was going on stage. So I found it light and entertaining, but very well crafted, and enjoyable piece.
Would have been nice to have been there, right? With all those ladies with their powdered wigs and Okay, so we move on. Tracks 23 through 29. There are a lot of tracks on this album. They're all really short, so they're separate short movements. There's a piece called Vorstellungen, which means it could be translated imagination or even fantasy. So you can think about it like that. It's a divertissement zum the 13th of February, 1803. So it's from the year 1803. And it was apparently a staged work. There's no scenario surviving, but there must have been plenty of pantomime, judging by the imaginative score, as Daniel tells us in his notes. Okay, so it starts with an introduction. It is a very imaginative score, in fact. It has a big, ominous largo opening, even though it says adagio. I thought this was slower than adagio, but still, it sounds ominous. There's not much room ambience. The sound is closed in and has that matte finish. And the work itself has some interesting orchestration with an English horn, I think. See, I should have looked at the score. I would know what it was. But
oboe here, I think.
Oh, it's an oboe here?
Oboe, bassoon, horn. Yeah.
It sounded reedy to me, so I was thinking, okay. It plays a phrase that starts with an octave, leap, which I thought was really interesting. Track 24, the Allegro, cheerful, chirpy, spring-like classical era theme with an interesting bridge and interrupted phrases and gliding second theme. And we hear them repeated after some intermediary material. Track 25, the Andante, and then moving to Allegro, is dreamy, answered by accented chords, followed by a short phrase. Creative use of the winds in this movement as is characteristic of Wranitzky's music. Okay, moving on. Track 26, number 3 in this suite. A guitar and flute start this chipper spring-like movement off, and one can easily imagine a light pantomime being acted out on the stage to this. This is really pretty. I like the orchestration here. Track 27, Allegro, has a full orchestra, has charming melodies. There's a piccolo, I think.
Yeah, piccolo.
Yeah, sounding like a fife with drums at one point. So put me in the mind of the American Revolution there.
Piccolo, oboe, bassoon, trumpet, and I thought I got a kick out of this soldier's drum.
Soldier's drum.
Yeah.
So a big bass, or maybe one of those
snare drum. Yeah,
the snare
it
drum.
sounds
Yeah.
like a snare, but maybe it's a bigger or more heavier weighted one.
And I've seen, I think about that. There's a famous kind of painting of these three colonial army, American colonial army with the flag,
I know
what playing the and the other one has a drum. I imagine it must have been a drum like that. Daniel mentions this could be a soldier saying farewell to his love in the pantomime as he goes off to battle. Track 28 is a march, and the string march is bold and martial. It acts as a rondo as we hear different themes in between, most of them quieter and more flowing. And the final track is a minuet. The flute returns to take the fleet melody, after which a droning bass supports wind instruments playing in harmony. And then this repeats, so it's a little more rustic. Finally, track 30, we get a separate piece, Quodlibet, on 13 February 1803. And this is the final Contradance of that. Now, a Quodlibet, if I remember, there's one of these in Bach's Goldberg variations, is a set of popular tunes that kind of get mixed together, and you're supposed to sort of invent something on them. And that's apparently what's happening here. It picks off where the previous divertissement left off. It's kind of a parody piece of Quodlibet. It uses a lot of borrowed material, and often from popular tunes of the day, the audience would recognize them. Daniel tells us this Quodlibet features a sizable collection of original and borrowed ballet numbers and popular dances. And the Contradance theme frames a host of contrasting sections with descriptive headings like illness, labor, happiness, gallop, caprice, beast of burden, bear, and judgment. It would have been nice to follow along the score and actually figure out where these were. Anyway, it starts with a fast Siciliano rhythm in the melody, answered by a bright outburst from the orchestra. The opening repeats, and then there's a melting string and wind section following at 2:15 or so, 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The opening material repeats and seems to act as a rondo at this point. The quiet section, charmingly orchestrated, is followed by a rough-sounding theme with strong bowed accents. Maybe that's the labor section. And after that, we hear a pastoral dance, and the contrasting sections keep coming. In the 8th minute, we hear strong droning basses and insistent accents on the chords. This must have been very entertaining for people who weren't looking at the score. You would just have to identify the sections. It must have been surprising. Okay, all of these themes peek in from time to time as the material heads to its final cadence. Very charming work. Okay, so at 78 minutes, this album is packed with music, and most of it, of course, is given to the opening ballet, which is conducted with the brightness and liveliness inherent in the score by Marek Štilec. The sound quality is good. I've often remarked on the drier, more matte finish to the sound that we hear in recordings from Central Europe. And while this isn't as dry as many of the recordings, like, say, on the Superfon label, it's kind of in that camp. The music itself has a lot of the hallmarks of Wranitzky's style. At the fore are heavy use of wind harmonies, and we've gotten used to this from Wranitzky's symphonies. A lot of it sounds Mozartian, especially in the more dancey or the narrative parts of the ballet. And many of the sections are short and repetitive in the ballet, though there are sections that drive the musical narrative forward too. The Vorstellungen and Quodlibet are both works with a lot of charm, meant to entertain, and entertain they do. This really is an album of entertainment music of its period. It's a worthy addition to the ongoing Wranitzky series on Naxos. And I still have to say, though, my personal love of the musical narrative as a symphony, I still like volumes 3 and 4 the best. But I would say, if you've been following the series, you'll definitely want to hear this. It's really good, and it's very light, so very entertaining.
Yeah, great Wranitzky melodies, that's what stands out to me. And also, in the ballet, I enjoyed the variety of instrumentation in each of the movements there to get whatever sort of scene and movement, what was going to be going on there, matched. So you get mixes and matches of the different wind instruments over the strings, and so that was kind of fun to hear the variety in there. I thought the performances were really good, and Marek's conducting brings out the contrasts in the pieces. There's nice dynamics.
Yes, good work, Marek. I should have said more about you.
There's a lot of action in a ballet like that, so there's sort of key places of motion and contrast, and you could tell that he was building up to certain points and knew what was coming well, and they anticipate that, and you're still surprised by it, but so that sounded really confident. And I also like the sound quality. It's clear. You can hear all the parts very well. Mm-hmm. And as you say, it's not a kind of big reverby kind of sound. It seems to have just the right room acoustics, slightly dry.
It works well, yeah.
But enough ambiance that the character of the instruments glows just a little bit. I don't know what the venue of the recording was, but I found it pleasing and also detailed enough so that I could really enjoy all the different timbres and make out the lines as I looked at the scores too. So another one in the Wranitzky series. I don't know how much music there is that.
Oh, there's probably a lot considering how much these composers wrote back in the day, but this could keep going on. We'll have to see.
It's gradually like the snowball rolling down the hill, gathering more listeners and people interested in this music. So I'm looking forward to hearing more. So keep them coming.
Indeed,
Naxos,
I'm on board too. I really enjoyed this.
Daniel, more Wranitzky, please.
Okay, now for my final recording, I've got more music by Caroline Shaw. The title of the album is The Wheel. It's also the name of one of the compositions on the album. And it's performed by I Giardini, who are Shuichi Okada on violin, Lea Henino on viola, Pauline Buet on cello, and Eriko Minami on percussion, and David Violi on the piano. And it's on the Alpha label. Now, this came out in, I believe, November or maybe even October 2022. But I mentioned in January that I would talk about this one, and now I'm finally getting to it now. That's just the way the Adult Music Podcast works. I did want to talk about it. And next week I'm going to do, incidentally, just a little highlight, all women composers for the classical side of things next week. And I wanted to make sure I got this one in too, because I have 3 other ones for next week. Actually, I have 4. One of them will only get a mention. But anyway, I have the CD of this. And before I talk about this album, which I really was very interested in, this might be the best recording of Shaw's music that I've heard so far, although I'll compare it to some others too. I need to talk about the CD. All right. Now, if you're going to go and listen to this on streaming, you're all set. Just give it a listen and you can follow along my notes. The CD, there's a problem with, well, maybe there isn't anymore. There's a problem with the CD if you have this. The booklet note follows the track listing on the streaming service, which is correct according to Alpha Records. I actually talked to somebody who was representing them, and he told me that the streaming order is the correct order. Now, that's the order in the CD booklet. The problem is on the CD itself, we don't get the correct track order. They've messed up the tracks. So if you happen to have this CD, you might want to check. If your first track is 6 minutes long, you have a CD that is not in the correct order. The first track should be around 10 minutes long. Now, I wrote to Alpha Records, and they told me that they have corrected this, and they're going to send me a new CD. So I'll have to wait probably a month to get this, but we'll find out if they actually did correct it. When I first wrote to them, they told me, oh, yeah, there was a printing problem with the CD booklet, but we've corrected it. But he didn't really understand what I was asking him. I certainly hope they did rearrange the track order. I would like this the way it's intended to be heard. I mean, you could always reprogram the CD, but, why would you want to do that when you can just sit down and listen? Anyway, I'll be talking about this on the order it's on streaming, which is the correct order. So if you have a CD not in the correct order, you're going to have to make an adjustment. If you have the CD, the track order is this. Track 1, Limestone and Felt. Track 2, The Wheel. Track 3, Gustave Le Gray. Track 4, Boris Kerner. Track 5, In Manos Tuas. And track 6, Thousandth Orange. So the first and last tracks have been reversed on the CD. Anyway, let's go in the order of the streaming, and I'll talk about these tracks. All right, first of all, let's talk about Caroline Shaw herself. She wrote the booklet notes explaining the inspiration and technique behind all of the work on this album. Now, I happen to know that Caroline Shaw, because she mentioned this in a note to other pieces on another album, likes the writing of Marilyn Robinson, and you can sort of tell by her own writing because she's very thoughtful in her writing. She tries to go deep on what are seemingly very simple things, and yet she's not complicated. She's almost completely without guile in her reading as well as in her composing. And this is one of the things that I find refreshing about her music, especially in this crazy world that we live in today. I don't know how she's remained so sincere. She's rather a rare creature these days. Anyway, her booklet notes are worth reading. And I once joked that she's overeducated in the humanities, as I personally want to be. I'm overeducated in the humanities too, but not as much as she is. She seems to really think about this stuff a lot. Anyway, she seems to be, more overeducated than I am. The first piece on the streaming is Thousandth Orange, and this is for violin, viola, cello, and piano, written in 2018. Now, Shaw, in her notes, explains that this is about the tiny revelations that living with something for a long time can open up. Shaw gives the example of still life paintings, where after the 10th or 100th or 1000th time one paints, or looks at, or eats an orange, so there's the title, The Thousandth Orange, it's just as beautiful as the first time, if you're looking at it with fresh eyes. Now, this is interesting to me because I've done a lot of Zen meditation, and you're always trying to, well, you don't try, you're trying to work yourself to be in the moment. And when you do that, everything is always new. So I was kind of interested in this idea. And it's the same with playing a piece of music or even a simple cadential figure. More reveals itself with time. I also want to mention, Caroline Shaw has a thing with oranges. The first album I heard by her, which was featured the Attacca Quartet back in 2019, was called simply Orange. And there's a piece on the album called Orange. I would like to know, what's her deal with oranges? Maybe she'll write to us and let us know. Anyway, she doesn't mention in the notes. Anyway, this starts with 4 light chiming piano chords, and they play in a repeating pattern. They just keep repeating throughout, although things gradually change. The strings play sustained chords over the piano chords, then take over for it in the second minute. The two sort of patterns reverse, with the strings now playing the chords and then the piano playing over that. A really nice little change there. At 3 minutes and 44 seconds, there's more movement in the rhythm as the strings play melodic material with repeated notes. At 5 minutes and 13 seconds, the piano takes over with a quicker version of the opening chords and an extension of them. And the material breaks up and creates new textures. The cello gets an affecting, directly stated melody at the beginning of the 6th minute, after which the strings play scattered, repeated, muted pizzicato notes as the piano intones its chords, which are in a different order now. In the 8th minute, it sounds like we're hearing 2, 3, 4, 1 now, but I'm not really sure. In the 8th minute, the piano starts playing its chords quietly in the very high end, then in the mid-range as the strings come in with sustained notes. We eventually get back to the pluck chords and the strings, and the piece just ends after one of these chords. Okay, Gustave Le Gray is track 2, and this is for solo piano. It was written in 2012. Now, on the Adult Music Podcast, we've already heard this work for a piano trio on the album Dance by the Minerva Piano Trio, which we heard earlier in the year. Shaw says here that when people, this is pretty interesting, this is why I'm really interested in the way she thinks. She says when people ask her what her music is like, she says it's like sashimi, which we know quite a lot about, in that it's made of chords and sequences presented in their raw, naked, preciously unadorned state. Okay, I can hear that.
Sounds fishy to me.
Yeah. Oh, boy. We hear Gustave Le Gray in an arrangement for piano trio already, as I mentioned. And this is the original piece. It was originally for piano. It's a multi-layered portrait of Chopin's Mazurka, Opus 17, number 4, a pretty famous one. I'm sure you've heard it. Using some of Chopin's ingredients, overlaid and hinged together with Shaw's own ingredients. It's for solo piano. It was originally written for Amy Yang. Here it's played by David Violi. Okay, so we could hear, like, in Shaw's beginning, this is her composition now, we can hear the hint of the Chopin Mazurka in the way with the repeating chords that she's playing. This extends a bit, and the constant repeating chords sort of point to Chopin. The piece ebbs and flows in dynamics of speed, and then by the time we get to the 3 minute and 48 second mark, we hear a direct reference to Chopin's melody. In fact, in this section, the material is really directly lifted from Chopin. I recognize the piano work itself. I think we hear the entire Chopin piece, in fact, with occasional counter melodies of additional material added by Shaw, which is always enjoyable. I kind of think about this, if you've ever heard this isn't a virtuoso piece by any means, but if you've ever heard Godowski's Studies on the Chopin Studies, which seems extremely redundant and really crazy to me. But he's sort of adding his own material to that. And I think she does a little bit of that, although much more subtly than Godowsky did. Those people were really nuts. By the way, there's a great recording by Marc-André Amelin of the Godowsky etudes on the Chopin etudes. In the 9th minute of this piece, Gustave Le Gray, we're hearing new harmonies and rhythmic idiosyncrasies in Chopin's theme. We get away from Chopin in the 10th minute with a chord pattern heard in the bass, and the rest of the piece is, as at the beginning, Shaw's material. All right, the work commissioned for this album, The Wheel, commissioned by the ensemble I Giardini, who we're hearing here. But this is for piano and cello only, and it was composed in 2021. The title comes from Shaw's concept of fragments of chord progressions and melodies that cycle around each other. They're playing different modes along the way. She says the piece, or the second half of it, it's not really clear from her notes, is like finding an internal rhythm and calm in your inner voices and reflections that carries you through when, for example, you're walking alone through a city at night. So you got to imagine yourself, there's all these things happening around you, but you've got this sort of still point in your mind that you've calmed yourself down. So it's an abstract idea, but something we're all familiar with from our own experience, so we should relate to this pretty well. The piano's accompaniment of the various sounds on the cello is very minimal in this piece, consisting of quiet, repeated notes on the beat occasionally. There's a buildup of volume in the 3rd minute as the cello becomes more aggressive in its chords. This softens to a piano line, with the cello now accompanying by plucking its strings. The roles reverse again. I really do like this technique of hers where she'll reverse the roles of the two instruments. It's always very obvious, and just noticing it just kind of makes me smile. I really like it. The roles reverse again in the 4th minute. Keep an ear out. This happens often. A crescendo is interrupted with silence at 7 minutes and 24 seconds, and we go right back to quieter material. All of it simple and appealing. There's another crescendo, getting loud and breaking through to the higher end of the piano. At the end, we have angel-like chords quietly played on the high end of the piano, with the cello marking time via pizzicato. I guess she's found her quiet place in her mind at this point. The big throaty tone of the cello helps this piece in its appeal. Track 4, called Boris Kerner. Kerner's a real person. He lives in Stuttgart, I guess we should say, and is the author of a book called Introduction to Modern Traffic Flow Theory and Control, the Long Road to Three-Phase Traffic Theory. Shaw says this work is one in a series based on the phrase, the detail of the pattern is movement, which I guess comes from the book. Anyway, this starts with the cello playing a bowed pattern at walking speed. The individual notes are disconnected. At the minute mark, you can hear the rattling of the flower pots. This is a work for cello and flower pots as percussion. I should have mentioned at the beginning.
And you should say they're metallic, too.
They are, yeah. They're not those ceramic ones. Yeah. Metallic flower pots. Anyway, the flower pots, when they come in at the minute mark, sound like a muted fire engine bell ringing. It's got that kind of ting-a-ling quality that fire trucks had at one point. When they had bells, now they have sirens, right? It gets more emphatic, the rhythm changes, and the flower pots take over by the 2nd minute. I like that sentence. The flower pots take over. It sounds like a horror movie. Anyway, the cello eventually regains the foreground and plays a more syncopated pizzicato line, sounding slightly African, like a rhythm you'd hear on a mbira. So it's got this sort of continuous kind of rhythm to it. The flower pots are back in the lead by the 3 minute and 45 second mark with varying sounds and a syncopated rhythm as the cello starts sawing out double stopped chords. The flower pots grow very loud up to the 6th minute, after which there are some cool muted sounds from them, and there's a decrescendo. At around the 6 minute and 20 second mark, the cello resumes its opening line. The flower pots get one more quiet appearance before the end. Track 5, In Manos Tuas. This is for solo cello. It's also could be played by solo viola, but we're hearing the original solo cello here. It's based on a 16th century motet by Thomas Tallis. So hey, we can link this right into the previous album. Byrd was, of course, Tallis's friend, and Tallis was his mentor. The motion, or lack of it, is intended to capture the sensation of a single movement of hearing the motet in Christchurch in New Haven, Connecticut. The cello comes in on chords, playing droning notes, sul ponticello, then pizzicati, then arpeggios. Now, I want to mention, I've noticed this throughout her albums for strings, Shaw likes to use all of the effects the instrument is capable of in every piece they appear in. So if we're going to hear a work for cello, we're going to hear it play pizzicato inevitably. We're going to hear it bowed. We're going to hear it play its harmonics. We're going to hear the bow played on the bridge. Every imaginable effect that's been used is going to be used in her music. And she kind of does this, I guess, as different sections, as different expressions of the piece. It's like the totality of what the instrument can do and not what the player can do with it makes up the body of the piece. At the 2 minutes and 55-second mark, we hear plucked arpeggiated chords, then bowed arpeggiated chords. And I'm not really picking up a sense of the Tallis motet in this piece, but as she says, the piece is based on the sensation that it causes for her. It's an appealing listen, full of interesting sounds, produced by the cello. At 4 minutes and 45 seconds, we hear harmonics for the first time in the piece, then a melody plucked out of the instrument, and the Tallis theme, I guess. We heard this earlier as well, so you do hear it, but it didn't really strike me as Tallis-like, shall we say. But I'm sure it is. I'll have to hear the original Tallis piece. Anyway, the sixth and final movement is a piece called Limestone and Felt for cello and viola. I actually enjoyed this one, I think, the most. The theme is two surfaces, one hard and one soft. Shaw imagines the hocketing pizzicato and peeling motivic cannons, the limestone, as part of a whimsical, mystical, generous world of sounds echoing and colliding in imagined eaves of a Gothic cathedral. These are contrasted with a delicate, meticulous, and almost reverent placing of chords, this would be the felt in the title, that to our ears today sound ancient and precious. So think loud and hard and soft and quiet for this piece. You'll hear the two juxtapositions often. Pizzicati provide all the texture at the beginning. It sounds like the cello is muting its string on certain pizzicati, getting a kind of Asian sound out of the instrument, like a shamisen would make, the Japanese instrument. Chords are plucked out of the higher instruments, giving a thick-stringed, loud lute effect. The entire texture of this work is very appealing, and there's a pop song-like repeating rhythm. Bowed strings appear at 1 minute and 55 seconds, but they play in a disconnected way. We hear Sul Ponticello playing at the end of the 3rd minute. There are a lot of effects in this work, as in the previous one too. At 4 minutes and 12 seconds, swooping, circling bowed figures are heard, a total texture change. It's very appealing, and it's very cool classical music. Okay, so the music here sounds really fun to play, and you get that sense that I Giardini are enjoying themselves when you listen to this album. It's also very direct and uncomplicated. Direct is the key word here. This one goes right into your ear and into wherever it's going to go in your body. Sincerity is the word commonly used to describe Shaw's music. And as I mentioned earlier, in our current partisan world of sniping and trolling on social media, it's especially refreshing music to hear. Sincerity generally implies simplicity, which is the case here, but it's a simplicity in the sense of a great teacher who can make complex topics easy to understand without really losing any of the complexity. It's sort of all implied. The complexity is there, but it's all clearly stated. I mentioned that Shaw thinks of her music as being like sashimi. I'd say it's also like a bowl of ramen, because you pretty much know what it's going to sound like before you hear it. How the strings will be used especially. You know you're going to hear all those effects. The approach doesn't vary much, but it's always satisfying like a bowl of ramen. That's why we eat them all the time. So you always go back for more. This album is probably the best one I've heard of her music so far, probably due to the presence of the piano, because the other two that I liked a lot were both by the Attacca Quartet. We did one earlier, and then there was one before we started the podcast called Orange, and those were all excellent too. So I think you should hear this, because I think it'll just make you feel. It's not particularly cheerful music. It's sort of thoughtful, but it's the directness of it that's so refreshing. And I think we all need that these days.
These are all very sparse works with a contemplative mood mostly. So I found them
sparse is a good word. Yeah.
I found them easy to listen to. It's easy to focus when you've got two instruments. Now, in the past, I've found her works to be rather episodic, with kind of startling quick changes sometimes. And there are unexpected developments in these compositions for sure, but they seem to follow arcs of development more than what I've heard in her works before. So I found myself more guided through them by what was happening. Yeah, I enjoyed these. My favorite, as with you, Limestone and Felt.
Yeah,
I guess I liked it best for the variety of string techniques that are used. The effects achieved by those techniques In other words, the expression and musical output. And then just the interplay between the viola and cello I found engaging. And so I like that one the best.
Anyway, more women next week.
All right, and now it's jazz time, and I do not have any theme this week other than all these records were released on the same day, and I wanted to sort of get things timely. You know, there's a lot of things coming out for spring, and it seems that in March, the big days were the 3rd, the 10th, and the 17th, so I've got these waves of new releases I'm working through. These all came out on February 24th. And they just struck me as interesting recordings with a variety of instrumentation, and that's why I wanted to get to them all.
They do have a funky theme, a lot of them. At least 2 of them do.
Yeah, there's some funky stuff going on here. But the first recording we're going to talk about is a little more flute, because a few episodes back we heard the wonderful flute of Isabel Bodenza, and we really liked that. That was flute, including bass flute with organ trio, which really blew us away. If you haven't heard that recording, you got to go back and check that out. And so we've got some more flute here, and we're going to go to Italy with, I guess you say, Michele?
Michele, that would be my name in Italian, actually.
Right?
Yeah.
And Michele Gori with the Flute Factor. And this is Dasè Sound Lab SRI. I don't know what that is.
It's kind of a cool name. Dasè Sound Lab. Ooh, sounds kind of scientific.
Scientific label here. Anyway, Gori is born in Domodossola, Italy, 1980, and he's one of the...
I have no idea where that is. Do you know?
No idea myself. You've been to Italy more than I have. I've been twice.
I haven't been there.
Okay. And he's one of the real prominent flute players on the European jazz scene, and he's also a specialist in using the entire flute family and electronics, which will hamper my explanation of what I'm hearing, because I often can't tell which register, the flutes overlap in the family, and I don't know. Sometimes I think it's alto flute or bass flute. And as far as the electronics, you can see some really cool videos of him on YouTube using loops and playing over himself. And it's all done really subtly and musically, so it's really cool. But I don't know what he's doing. There's no documentation of that for what I could find online on this recording. So just know that it's really cool flute things that are going on here. And he's actually also the only Italian flutist to have an academic position as professor of jazz flute. So his background, he graduated in flute at the Conservatory G. Cantelli of Novara. He got an honors degree in jazz music at the Conservatory G. Verdi in Milan, and also a diploma in jazz flute from the Centre d'Informations Musicales in Paris. And he's a jazz professor now and head of jazz department at the Conservatory of Music Emmanuel Chabrier, Clermont-Ferrand, France. And he's got 2 other albums under his own name, also with the Michele Gori Quartet, My Jazz Flutes and Flute Stories. But here we've got the Flute Factor. So Gori's on flute, and we've got Roberto Olzer on piano and electric piano, Roberto Mattei on bass, and Nicola Stranieri on drums. As I said, I won't attempt to know what kind of effects and things are going on, but there's some interesting tones that come out.
I couldn't figure this out either.
Yeah.
Sort of,
We're going to start out with Revolution, and as Mike said before, a funkiness pervades some of the recordings, and this is a funky one for sure, with Mattei giving a 4-bar bass intro here. And check out the cool little harmonic diversion that comes right up in the second measure on that funky bass line. Stranieri and Olzer, who's on electric piano on this track, join in for another round of that intro pattern. And then the melody here is a 12-bar bluesy theme with some really cool alternating chords in the second half of it. And the bass and the flute sync up their lines, which was kind of cool too. You can hear harmonics in the flute, and I don't know how he's doing that. Is this an effect or part of his technique? It just sounds really cool. But they go around this 12-bar pattern twice. And Gori solos first, and his phrasing is fluid when he weaves his ideas in and out of the chords. They change up the form to 16 bars for the solos, and after one round of the original funky groove, they change it up to a fast swing with more chord changes added to it. Back to the original groove and an electric piano solo from Olzer. He works into the swing change-up too, with some very cool rhythmic ideas in his lines. Stranieri gets a drum solo. It's kind of restrained and focuses on the tones that he can get around the drum kit. And then he gets the groove started again for a final run of the melody to a sudden ending. Track 2 is called Black and Blues. There's another funky fun tune, with a straight rocky and heavy beat. They get going with a 4-bar intro with the bass and acoustic piano setting out this groove that leaves a drum hit on the 4th beat. Then Gori takes the pickup line into the bluesy melody. From the chord changes you hear here in the 5th and 9-bar, it leads you to expect, this might be a 12-bar blues form, but that's actually extended to 16 bars with these alternating chords, and then a surprise in the last 2 measures. The harmonies are a little different there, 15 and 16 bar. And then Gori is up first for a solo, but here in the solos they go with a 12-bar blues format. And he has really great bluesy improvisations, cool falling lines, and the slow groove lends itself to short phrases with spaces in them to build up anticipation to whatever idea he comes up with next. Mate gets a bass solo also, and he keeps a rhythmic and syncopated groove in his melodic ideas, and they take the intro line into another melody run to close it out. Track 3 is Miedo. This is kind of a longing ballad. It's got a soft, Latin-y, even beat on drum brushes that give it a kind of 8-beat feel. There's a 4-bar intro here with acoustic piano and a weighty bass line. It sounds like Gori is using one of the lower range flutes here, and the tone is interesting with a subtle vibrato and soft phrasing. The 24-measure melody is minor, but it has a few brighter harmonic twists that lift it up along the way. Mate takes a bass solo. His tone is really full and ringing with relaxed phrases, and Gori follows with a sublime solo where the lines flow out lazily. Is this alto flute, I wonder? Could be. He works into the higher range, getting some interesting tonal edges, and he continues on, connecting back to a final time through the melody. Then we've got Jazz Time for track 4, but actually, it's another super funky straight beat to start anyway, with a really tricky syncopated flute melody over the groove with electric piano back on this one. Sounds like a 24-bar AAB form. Gori launches off into a solo with lots of fun fluttering phrases, and after one round of the form, they switch it up to a fast double-time swing with the new 16-measure chord progression. Gori continues on, taking flight for a few choruses, and he comes up with great melodic ideas that build on each other, even at these speedy tempos. Olzer follows with an electric piano solo and speedy melodic lines with a few tricky rhythmic licks along the way. And Stranieri gets a drum solo here, and he works it back to the original straight funky groove into 8 measures of the A part of the original melody, with the fun final hesitation to finish it up. It's another nice tune of change-up ideas with tempos and feels here. Track 5 is Looking Forward. It's a very short, slow ballad duet for just piano and flute that shows off Gori's range of tone. It starts kind of melancholy, but builds to a great climax with bright building chord changes and a rising flute line. After a short pause, it comes down to a soft ending. It's very pretty and expressive. And track 6, The French Girl. You want to meet her? She's a funky one, too, let's say.
Oh, yeah, I want to meet this one then, in that case.
Check out the cool electric piano and bass groove over Stranieri's clicky beat in the 8-bar intro. The flute melody is very seductive, reaching low with some subtle pitch inflections, and the groove has a nice little change-up and push from the 17th measure. Seems like 24 measures with an extra 2 bars to vamp into the start of Gori's solo, and then they change up to a 12-bar minor blues form. Gori does a lot of cool stuff here with breathy and funky phrases and building harmonic tension outside of the chords. He pulls off some speedy lines too and ends up way down low. Mate and Olzer groove out on the intro riff for Stranieri to get busy around the drum kit, and he's a very precise drummer. They work it back into another round of the melody with some added improv lines from Gori between phrases and a high flute line ending. Track 7, I looked at this word, Tatuzinho. So what is that?
It's probably Portuguese.
Yeah, it's Portuguese, and it's the name for what we call in Japanese marumushi. Those little like bugs with the hard kind of
the ones The ones that you crush and they smell really bad? Those?
No. These are the ones that roll up into like a little ball on some kind of isopoda or something like that. It's actually got a samba beat to it. And it's at first a fun kind of detached electric piano opening lick. And the flute sounds great on Latin groove, always like this. And Mate has a real throbbing bass going on here. The melody's a 24-measure theme, with the last segment building up tension with the rhythm. Nice electric piano fills between the phrases. And for the solo break, Gori picks up on that intro piano lick we heard, and then an exciting solo with lots of cool breathy articulation ideas and waves of lines. Olzer gets an electric piano solo with a mix of flowing and connected lines and some cool tumbling figures. Also, some fun rhythmic play in there, too. Once more through the melody, and they finish it up on the fun lick that we heard at the beginning, and then before the solos all together at the end. And track 8, fittingly, Au revoir. Another short flute and piano ballad duet to end it. It's a 16-measure melody with pretty chord changes, but they turn hopeful, giving you the feeling that we'll meet again after the 9th measure of the melody. They go around twice with Gori working subtle improvisations the second time, and you can really enjoy his tone from low register to high and the delicate phrasing that goes along with this very nice expression. So it's a short recording at just 33 minutes, but there's a lot of variety. Funky grooves for sure, fast swing, Latin, and endearing ballads. The compositions and arrangements are fun, often varying the structures and grooves from the melody to the solo passages. Gori's tone is distinctive and expressive, great technique matched by melodic improvisations. Rhythm section is tight with Stranieri's precise and measured drumming. Nice bass push and solos from Mate, and Olzer has some fine solos on piano and electric piano. I'm looking forward to checking out more of his recordings, and I'll start with those previous two I mentioned.
Yeah, overall, this is a really cheerful album, and it kind of reminded me of being with my Italian friends. They kind of, they're like a lot of these tracks are. And Gori himself, he seems to like those funky grooves. There are a lot of them on the album. And he's good really at every tempo, but I feel like he really comes alive in the more upbeat tunes. He plays the ballads well as well. Yeah. I don't want to take that away, but I feel like he's like at his he's reaching his center when he's at the when he's in a more upbeat tune. In the ballads like Au revoir, he gets a beautiful, full, heartfelt tone. And also, it's nice to hear the Fender Rhodes. Is that a Fender Rhodes? Yeah, on many of the tracks.
It's just his electric piano. So I'm not sure if it's a Fender or a different make. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it was nice to hear anyway, because you don't hear enough of it anymore. I had too much of it in the 70s, but now I kind of miss it. It was so long ago. Anyway, well recorded as well. Some people may find this to be very closely recorded, but I liked it the way it was. So I thought it was good. Let's just say that. Give it a listen.
Check it out. It's always good to hear some jazzy flute, and he's definitely got the chops and ideas to make an exciting recording there. All right, now we're going to go to an album that I really enjoyed as well.
Me too. This was my favorite jazz album of the week, actually. Yeah.
We've got For Good People. Hey, that's us.
That's us.
Forget about it. Right. By Tim Collins. And this is on Edition Collage label. Also came out February 24th. Tim Collins on vibraphone, Matthias Bublath on organ, and Christian Lettner on drums. And, well, I was really interested to find out more about Collins. And turns out he's from Plattsburgh, New York.
You know where that is?
Yeah, it's way up north. My uncle lived there, actually. Oh, wow. And but he's been in Munich for the past 12 years. And we heard him previously with Quadro Nuevo on their recording December. If you remember that, back in episode 92, that was our Christmas episode, You'll Be Merry. And this is not really a Christmas or holiday recording. It was kind of Christmassy because they've recorded previous Christmas music things. So this was just sort of seasonal. But that was a really interesting recording, and I picked up on his vibes playing from there. Now, more on, it even gets closer to my old stomping grounds than Plattsburgh in one of these tracks, and I'll get to that later. But Bublath is Collins' oldest companion here because after studying in Linz and then at the Berklee College of Music and the Manhattan School of Music, Bubleth lived and worked in New York for 9 years, and the two have known each other since then. And we really loved his recording Orange C, which was
he plays the piano.
Right?
Yeah,
and that was
really
one that we discussed back in episode 84, Cerebral Keys, and it also made our best of 2022 recording list. And I saw that he was also an organ player too, and I was waiting to check out some new organ music from him. So I got my wish here. And so this is a really engaging recording that we've got here.
Yeah, we got more than our wish here. We got a few wishes.
So we're going to start out with a tune by Tim Collins, Mainline Rush. And Bubleth and Lettner get it going with a funky beat for an 8-bar intro. The organ has a descending chord pattern of 3 chords that return to the original chord. Then Collins joins in with the melody on vibes. It's a cool development over 32 bars. The first section has nicely shaped 8-bar phrases that build off from each other. Then the next section gets more animation. Then a lighter harmonic and groove change bridge section with a lighter clicky beat as well. Then a final funky push section with more organ swells from Bubleth. Collins gets a solo first, starting with some muted mallets and snippets from his melody. He builds it up over the sections, over Bubleth's organ hits and pulsing bass, letting the mallets fly with impressive speed, but always melodic ideas from Collins. They save the contrasting bridge section for Bubleth to come in on for his solo and stick to it for a few rounds of lighter organ work. He takes it into the funkier sections, getting bluesier improvisations, into another couple rounds of the final melody section from the beginning with an outro mirroring the intro, but with soft added ideas from Collins. It's a fun and funky start and cool switching around of the different sections of the tune. Track 2 is Trapped by Bubleth. The drums fill into an 8-bar intro of repeating 2-measure organ and vibe figures. That's 8 measures of 7/8 time, which is a bit unusual. Collins takes the flowing melody of sustained notes that contrasts with the busy cymbals below for the first 16 bars. There's a real contrasting section of syncopated lines that the vibes and organ work together for 7 measures. Maybe that's to emphasize the whole 7 idea of the meter. You usually hear a 7-measure phrase, They go around those patterns again. Bubleth solos next, and he keeps his lines flowing smoothly over the odd meter and staying on repeats of the 16-measure section. Lettner really mixes up the drums expertly underneath with tight fills. They transition to Collins' solo with the contrasting 7-measure section. He weaves happy-sounding melodies with relaxed phrasing, even when he gets speedier figures going. And you can really hear his attacks clearly on the recording, and the sound pans left to right in the recording over the range of the vibes. If you have headphones on, it'll really stand out. Right. So it's like he's right in front of you with the vibraphones. They reset with the intro back into another round of the melody, and they get to the contrasting section and jam on the groove for Lettner to get some tasty drumming time to the end. We've got the title track, Tim Collins' original for Good People for track 3. Collins composed the title track in the fall of 2021 after learning about the death of an old friend. This is his quote from his website. "In the past few years, I've lost more than a few good people in my life," he says. "I wanted to pay tribute to them, but also to the good people who are still here." So it starts out with some light drums and cymbals that lead into a 4-bar intro that sets a slow beat, but with a good bass pulse and a dreamy atmosphere, a bit gospel-y with the organ sound here. Collins has written a simple and beautiful melody, and he plays it very gently, adding soft trills and spots. There's a 12-bar section we hear twice with a contrasting bridge that has really cool organ swells from Bubleth. You think you're going to hear the first section again, but it changes with a break after 9 bars for a solo break from Collins into a funkier groove with a great organ work from Bubleth for Collins to work over. He finds the bluesy spots and mixes in dreamier, smooth phrases, and Bubleth gets a go next with a very soulful solo. The organ sounds great, and he really integrates his bass lines with his bluesy phrases, playing on and on. Collins and Bubleth work a section of ascending lines that lift the feeling into a short 8-measure reprise of the original melody. A very nice tune. Track 4, another Collins original, Don't Get Caught. And we'll go a little Afro-Cuban with this one. Collins and Bubleth work a tight clave groove for the 8-bar intro with nice fills from Lettner. The melody section's 32 bars long, with Collins working animated phrases over cool modulations. In the second half, it gets more excitement from the fun Cuban organ rhythms that Bubleth puts out, And the final 8 bars have really fun, speedy lines from Collins and Bubleth that they work together in unison. They reset to the intro groove for a setup for Collins' solo. Lots of speedy mallet work, but always great melodies from him. And Bubleth really makes the organ and bass pedals pump with all kinds of variety under him. And Lettner mixes up the drum patterns expertly as well. Another intro section into Bubleth's solo, and he really connects lines smoothly on this one. They vamp around on the intro for Lettner to get busy again on the drums with some high-pressure ideas, and then take a final run through the melody and some tags of those fun unison figures to an exciting ending. Track 5, Jack's Joint. This is a Bubleth tune. That's J-A-K''S. And all right, we've done a lot of organ trio recordings, and I always say you need one tune with a cruising groove, and that's this one. You know, riding along with the top down, your Hawaiian shirt and your gold chain, and you just got that organ tune on. Well, that's what this one is here. Lettner fills it into a heavy and steady beat for the intro that has trilling and dreamy ringing vibes. Syncopated vibes and organ line leads into the melody. It's 24 measures with different A, B, and C sections. Bubleth gets it going, and Collins joins in on the rising lines of the B section with ringing notes and some unison lines in the C section that lead to organ lines. And they go around it twice. The solo sections are different at 28 measures with some more shifting chord changes. Bubleth goes first and swells up the tension nicely, and Collins plays some really tasty lines and cool snappy mallet figures. They go through the A, B, and C sections and then stick around on the B section for Lettner to do some tight drum improvising to a solo drum fill and a final rising and falling line to end it. Now we're going to get the only non-original on the recording, track 6, Sweet and Lovely. And this is a pop song of the day, goes back to 1931 by Gus Arnheim, Charles N. Daniels, and Harry Tobias. And they give it an interesting Latin beat intro. And check out the cool rising bass lines from Bubleth. It's an AABA structured tune. Collins takes the melody on vibes that switches up to swing in the second half of the A section and has cool synced up lines with the organ. The B section they let float without the drum beat and just light cymbal and hi-hat accents. And Bubleth solos first, and they keep it swinging for the solo. He has great chugging bass lines walking along under there. He works up to some edgier tone and some speedy repeated note ideas and playful phrases into some cool bluesy trills as well. Collins follows with a swing feel and snap in his lines and some speedy double time licks and one more melody run with a few final phrase repeats to end it neatly. Now we're going to get the standout tune that really blew me away here, Bibol Youssef, and this is a Bubleth tune. And we're in for some tricky rhythms and Middle Eastern modal play on this one. Check out the wild ostinato line that Bubleth gets going under ringing vibes from Collins and subtle drumming from Lettner. And I guess this is in a 9/8 meter. It's really odd. Collins and Bubleth take the serpentine but rhythmic modal melody line in unison, and then the ostinato returns before some more unison figures, this time over a funky bass line into a solo from Collins. Bubleth and Lettner really have a groove going in this unusual meter. Bubleth has cool chord work around Collins's rhythmic solo lines. Then Bubleth has some fun meandering lines to get his solo going into some modal and outside harmonic exploration. Mysterious tension building and swelling chords too. There's a lot of fun on this one, bringing bluesy with some trills and held out chords all together. They work the snaking unison melody lines again, this time with more forceful playing and fills from Lettner underneath to a final ominous sounding ending. Track 8 is a Collins original, Situli Shuffle. Lettner makes a really busy, subdivided but light kind of New Orleans beat, and Bubleth plays a really funky bass line for an intro into a kind of topsy-turvy unison melody line from Collins and Bubleth. It's a speeding roller coaster, and you can't see what's up ahead. Seems to be 64 bars with a lot of different sections in it. It's like some of them repeat. So you have like an A, B, C, D, C kind of pattern with a kind of more cruising groove on the D part. Collins solos first, and the groove lends itself to speedy double-time lines as he flies along, mixing very cool rhythmic patterns and figures with harmonic ideas. Bublé has great organ cheering him on underneath, and they play that speedy C section of the melody together to a quick break before Bublé takes over. He pulls it back more relaxed before getting into more speedy lines and harmonic directions, getting in some bluesy territory at the end. It's another unison C section of the melody, and then there's a cool change. They downshift it to a slow groove, started by some chilled rhythmic vibes from Collins, and Lettner fills it into the new beat, and Bublé has rich dark-toned hits and swells into some exchanges between organ and vibes to a fade-out. Track 9, another Collins tune, Down the Old Road, and in the notes on his website, it says that dark road is a road in Lake George, New York, that went to his grandparents' house. And it's not too far from some relatives of mine there, too. So even closer than Plattsburgh, that good old upstate New York region. This is a swinging 6/8 tune. Vibes and organ work it together for the 8-bar bouncy intro. The melody seems to be 20 measures with interesting mood changes from minor to major along the way as Collins keeps it driving along the road. They go through the intro and melody once again. It gets into a little transition section that turns dark and mysterious for a hold. Then they restart the bouncy intro idea for Collins to get a solo started. Takes a couple rounds of the intro and melody pattern with good snappy lines in his solo. Bublé takes a trip around with a nice change-up in organ tone on the way. They take it through the melody again to some sustained ringing out vibes and close it out with an outro like the intro section. And track 10, let's see. How's your German there, Mike?
Schorfheide.
Schorfheide. Okay, Bublé tune.
Just to take a stab at it.
Lettner's got a strong rocky beat for this one. It builds up tension with a long intro of 3 repeated syncopated chord hits to ringing vibes from Collins. Bublé adds a melody that kind of fits between those hits for a few rounds and then trades it off to Collins. There's a contrasting section. Then they work together on melody lines. It comes down to a softer, clicky drum beat for Collins' vibe solo, but Bublé keeps the bass line funky with a pulse underneath, gets his own solo working down into the lower register, and then into speedier and swirling organ as Lettner builds the beat back up. They take it back through the chord hits and unison melody lines into a quieter, clicky groove for Collins to do some cool, soft, descending mallet work into some more final improvisations over the groove, and it fades away. Well, organ and vibes really make a great match of tones for music. We heard it once before on the podcast with Bernie Sinesky and Stefan Bauer on Organic Ear Food in episode 80.
One of my albums of the year, actually, last year.
Chambermaid. And Collins has great technique here. His improvisations are always melodic, even over difficult meters and grooves. And Bublé is just as impressive on organ as he is on piano. He chooses great tones to match the tunes, as well as having really killer bass lines. he plays organ bass just like a bass player's lines would work into a tune. Lettner is tight and mixes up great grooves and creative fills throughout. We've got really great original melodies on the tunes with some tricky meters and structures to figure out as well. The Bibol Youssef stands out as the really tricky number here, but fine solos and interplay through everything, and I really enjoyed this recording.
Yeah, I did too. It has funky grooves, just like the previous one, and it just felt really good. It's got this real carefree kind of vibe to it too, and I think I was really ready for something like this when I heard it. This especially became the case as it went on, because once, like you, Bibol Youssef came on, I was really drawn in. I mean, the album really took off. It was already good, but it really took off from this point, and that was that and Situli Shuffle were the two standout tracks for me. Not for the way they begin, but for the way they build an excitement during the solos. I thought they even kind of heated up even more as they went on. I really enjoyed that. I was a little disappointed that Situli Shuffle and Schorfheide both fade out at the end. I really,
that's your
I have this standing rule. I think jazz should end. It's just one of those kinds of music. But I also love the groove in Schorfheide too. And this might be, it's too early to say, but this is going to be in consideration for one of my albums of the year, I'd say. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Really that
in the right place.
Organ and vibes goes together really well. All right, and speaking of musicians we enjoy a lot, I can never stay away from a Posi-Tone release with our favorite and most featured rhythm section of the podcast. There's too many episodes to recount here with this rhythm section, but we've got a trumpet player we haven't gotten to yet, and one that I've had my ear on and wanted to get one of his recordings to talk about. And so that's Josh Lawrence and his release also February 24th on Posi-Tone, and that too. And Lawrence holds a bachelor's degree from the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, a master's degree from the Juilliard School in New York, and he also studied with legendary pianist Barry Harris. In 2021, he was named Director of Jazz Studies at the Interlochen Center for the Arts, where he now leads the Arts Academy and summer camp programs and conducts the Interlochen Jazz Orchestra. And he's got 5 solo albums with Posi-Tone Records, 2 albums with Rope-A-Dope Records, co-leading the Fresh Cut Orchestra, which received 2 Grammy Award nominations with pianist Orrin Evans's Captain Black Big Band and Smoke Session Records. And he can be heard on some pop music recordings as well. Boys to Men, Erykah Badu, Jasmine Sullivan, Lauren Tallis, and others. So I think he's one of the significant trumpet players out there today. So I just wanted to catch one of his next recordings, and with my favorite rhythm section of the time. And on this recording, we've also got Willie Morris on tenor saxophone, the great Art Hirahara on piano, Boris Kozlov on bass. Got 2 drummers, actually. Jason Tiemann, I'm not sure, drums tracks 1, 2, and 6. So we've heard him before with Stephen Riley and others. And then the great Rudy Royston on the rest of the tracks on drums here. Mark Fries, the producer, Nick O'Toole, the engineer. This was recorded back in 2021 at Acoustic Recording, Brooklyn, New York. This album's got some things that make it a little bit difficult to get to the heart of, because it has a lot of tunes that kind of don't spend too much time on the melody and get right into the solo, which makes it really hard to figure out the structure on initial listenings. And so I'm going to have to listen to some of these some more. And we're going to start out with a Willie Morris tune, Grit, for the first track. And it's got 4 bars of drums and about 6 bars of trumpet and sax melody, and then Lawrence is off and running on a solo. It's a modal adventure over a driving swing, marked out by Tiemann's cymbals and Kozlov's fast-walking bass. You can get a sense of his full tone right away here. That's Lawrence's tone, and creativity with different rhythmic figures mixed with more flowing lines. Hirahara builds up thick chiming chords to push him along. Lawrence builds off some interval ideas and gets into some higher register forceful playing and dissonance for a climax. There's a longer section of the intro melody snippet we heard at the beginning to transition to Morris's sax solo, and then they downshift to a swing of about half speed, and Morris matches with fluid and relaxed lines. Kozlov is throwing in some really meaty fills on the bass underneath, and Morris builds some figures up from low register digs. And listen closely to the bass and cymbals as fits and spurts of the fast swing break in before they shift it back to the speedy tempo. Morris weaves speedy lines, interspersed with some cool high note hits and cool rhythmic ideas, moving in and out of the modes. Kozlov switches up from the walking to a snappy interval idea for Hirahara to get started on a rhythmically exciting solo, and they transition it back to a slow walking swing, and Hirahara works through interesting harmonic ideas into little waves of figures. Back to the fast tempo and big percussive piano chords, and they end it with the sax and trumpet melody phrase. Track 2, something a little familiar to jazz fans, Nefertiti, the Wayne Shorter tune. Hirahara starts it with a sparse solo piano intro, and then Lawrence enters with the melody on a harmon-muted trumpet. It's really slow. The motion comes from Kozlov's thick ringing bass. Tiemann here on drums adds soft drum textures, and Lawrence gets the resonance out of the muted tone to really bloom in the lower register, probably right up to the microphone, and you can get that huge sound out of it. Nice relaxed phrasing and articulation with some pitch-bent attacks near the end. Hirohata starts his solo with a stream of trickles and continues with pretty rolling figures that build up to more percussive chords with timid swelling cymbals. Things come down again for Lawrence to return with more muted melody. Kozlov is playing some cool chord figures underneath, and Hirohata decorating lightly with piano figures, and Lawrence takes it to a long sustained note ending. Track 3, a Lawrence original here, Cosmological Constant. Royston's toms swell into this one. The first section of the melody has Latiny staccato horn figures with feisty drum fills, and that repeats. Then there's a section of super speedy legato horn figures, then a section that mixes those two ideas, and then it changes up to a more loping swing groove for 4 bars, and finally speedy exchanges between trumpet and sax. It's quite an amusement park ride of a melody arrangement here. They come out of it in a driving swing, and Morris is up for a solo first. He's fluid and speedy over the fast tempo, which is a minor AABA construction for the solo. It's a little easier to follow here. Royston's cymbals and drumming is super tight and feisty underneath, and Lawrence comes in for a start on some repeated licks, and they shift it to the loping swing with an Art Blakey kind of feel to it. Lawrence gets some great sassy Lee Morgan kind of licks, finding a lot of cool bluesy spots, flutter tonguing, and some higher register notes, pushing it to a big climax with big chiming chords from Hirohata, who transitions to his solo with some speedy, bouncy, and bluesy licks. He continues on with great swing feel and some super fun rhythmic play before things get speedy again, and he really rips it up and keeps going. The horns add the staccato line figure and then come back with the smoother speedy lines. They take the loping lines to a slowdown into a trill to end it. Great solos all around, but Hirohata really burns up on this track. Yeah. Really great one. Track 4 also, Josh Lawrence, original North Winds. This one has another really short 4-measure melody idea to get started. Lawrence begins with a solo trumpet figure that Morris answers before they come together, and Lawrence is launched on his solo over a fast swing with lots of minor modal changes. The fast swing dissolves for Morris to start his solo with a sparse rhythm section environment. Check out Royston's development of the new even beat from light hi-hat and clicks all the way up to furious fills, and how a new groove develops with Kozlov and Hirohata's interaction. Morris keeps his lines rhythmic and snappy with lots of sheets of harmonic exploration all the time this is developing. Hirohata locks his solo ideas into the groove with precision and creates a lot of rhythmic excitement with zippy lines and percussive chords. The horns come back in over him with a new repeated syncopated rising line to a sudden ending. Track 5, another Lawrence original, Black Keys. Hirohata starts it out solo with an interesting 2-hand interplay. It sounds like on the Black Keys, making a pentatonic mood on the piano here. He then starts a slow rhythmic groove that Kozlov joins, and Lawrence adds a melody over with a really nice trumpet tone and subtle vibrato. Morse joins in with answering lines, and Royston adds soft hi-hat and accents. The horns join together on lines with fills underneath from Hirohata, and then Lawrence solos first, getting a mournful mood over just Kozlov's simple pulse and light hi-hat with lyrical phrasing and smeared notes and plungy growls. He works up to some more harmonically exploring lines, leaving a lot of space between ideas. Kozlov switches up to a slow walking line when Hirohata comes in with his solo. It has a bluesy laziness and some fun rhythmic play that gets into thick percussive chords. The horns come back for some final unison lines on top of the end of the piano solo, and things calm down for a sparse ending. Track 6 is another Willie Morris tune, Hole in the Wall. And I think this is the shortest melody fragment yet, with just 2 measures and a final note to get Morris launched on a solo over just drums and Kozlov's bass to start. Hirohata adds fills and chord punctuations gradually, and Morris has a lot of harmonic freedom here and gets some edgy and angsty ideas among his snappy phrases. The final phrases unwind, and Lawrence overlaps, matching the phrasing to get started on his solo. Kozlov mixes up the bassline rhythms in tricky ways that interacts with Lawrence's phrasing, and Lawrence has some interesting harmonic explorations and a lot of Miles Davis-inspired articulation here. Listen for the unexpected melody phrases he finishes up with. You'll think it's over when Kozlov stops the walking bass lines, but wait for the short opening horn phrase to come back and end it. Track 7 is called Left Hanging. a Lawrence original, a delicate rubato opening from Hirahara into another harmon-muted ballad for Lawrence. Very slow waltz tempo for the pretty melody. Lawrence again uses the lower register bloom of the harmon-mute tone to get a really rich sound. Morris joins in to harmonize on the final section of the melody, and he continues on with a solo. Very nice phrasing and building with soft intensity. Hirahara's solo shows off his delicate touch with beautiful trickling phrases, and Lawrence keeps his solo lyrical but often with snappy little ideas. Building melodic phrases really trace out the interesting tensions and releases that he's built into these chord changes. He continues on into a second round, and Morris joins him on the last section as they get back to the harmonized melody lines to a slowed down ending with more pretty trickles from Hirahara and thick bowed bass from Kozlov. We're going to end it with a cool tune, also a Lawrence original, Cantus Firmus, and this is in a 5/4 meter with a great loping bass line from Kozlov. There's a 16-bar intro to set it out, and Royston does some tasty fills around the kit to set the mood. The melody's 16 measures and has the horns working unison and then splitting off. Lawrence has some clear high lines that stand out. Hirahara solos first, lots of big chiming chords and zippy melodic lines, and Lawrence picks up on his final idea of a series of ascending phrases to start an exchange of 8-measure phrases with Morris that become 4 measures, then 2, and finally have them weaving lines together. Kozlov and Hirahara keep an ostinato going with a few chord injections for Royston to have some solo time around the drum kit. Then the horns return with a variation of the melody line that gets broken up with some harmonic tension from Hirahara's chords before the final phrase. And that's it. I thought Lawrence shows off a mature style of soloing and harmonic conception. You can hear the big post-bop influences of major trumpet players, Miles Davis, Freddie Hubbard, but he's really got his own sound. I like his ideas and phrasing a lot. He doesn't show off technically, but rather aims for a melodic and harmonic exploration of the material he's working with. 2 really nice ballads here, one original and one Wayne Shorter tune. A couple of tunes just build from melody fragments, it seems, but they go to interesting places with this great rhythm section and Morris's versatile sax playing. Black Keys and Cantus Firmus added a lot of variety to round out the compositions. Fine solos all around, Hirahara impressing as usual, and great grooves and impact from Rudy Royston. The only thing missing on this whole recording is a bass solo from Kozlov, but I guess we'll just have to wait for the next one. Yeah,
one of our favorite basses. We probably featured him more than any other musician on the entire
most
podcast.
Appearing musician on the Adult Music podcast. Yeah.
All right, anyway, yeah, one thing that grabbed my ear about this is not only the suddenly changing rhythms and tempos that they use, but musical styles even changed in the compositions. I was like, it was kind of a major wow for me, like on the fly like that, to have these things change so suddenly and unexpectedly. It kept me on my toes, I have to say. I did notice about Hirahara was great, but his sound, the piano sound, changed from track to track, and I was wondering if it was because of the recording change or if he's actually playing different pianos. Like sometimes it sounded like it had sort of a more old-timey kind of sound to it, and sometimes it sounded more like a grand piano. I wasn't really sure, but that's what I noticed. And he was fantastic. He's a favorite of the podcasts. Yeah. Sometimes it's more like kind of rich sounding, and sometimes it's more like got more of a sort of dry sound, like it's an upright or an old piano or something like that. Anyway, we get some plunger mute from Lawrence, which I'm sure you enjoyed when that came up. And I like it when it's used sparingly, as here. Although I did like it on the guy who played with Snorri Kirk.
Oh, Tobias Wiklund.
Wiklund. Yeah, I like the way he uses it too. It's part of his character, and I particularly enjoyed it. Oddly enough, with all so many favorite musicians on this album, I really enjoyed Morris's soloing. He had great tone and a sensitive approach to the slower material. He was also warm and quick in the faster, so he's someone I had my ear on. I really enjoyed him. That's Willie Morris III in tenor sax.
Yeah, anyway, Lawrence's playing is really mature, incorporates the post-bop trumpet tradition, but he's got his own voice and very mature kind of harmonic style exploration, very solid in all of his registers. As I said, he doesn't really show off, but he adds to the tune and uses the material to go in interesting directions. So I'm going to be listening to any new music that he releases as well.
Okay, and I guess that's it.
I guess that's it for episode 107. We don't have any preview for next week, other than Mike will be featuring female composers in the classical end. And I'm going to go more on a time order release to make sure I pick the best of things that come out and don't miss anything. So there'll be some variety in there. And shortly after this episode gets published, if you wonder what that will be, you can go check out the playlist on Deezer or the link to it that will be posted on our Facebook site. Come over to Facebook. Anyway, check that out to get new releases that may or may not make it into an episode in the future. If you just need something new to listen to, the latest and the greatest every week, come over and check that out. And don't forget, as we mentioned at the beginning, interview 7 with Nicholas Sivalov, pianist, composer, and now composer of symphonies as well. I think the whole world is going to know about him more and more. If you want to get some insight to all this great music he's creating, check out our interview, which will be released on Thursday morning Japan time or Wednesday night US time.
Yeah, and I encourage you to hear that. It was a really fun interview, and I think you'll enjoy it and find it very illuminating.
As always, thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. Stay tuned. Lots of great music coming up this spring, and we'll be back with female composers and fresh picks of spring jazz in episode 108. So we'll see you again next episode.
Gerald Albright, Maria Schneider, Charlie Hunter, Duke Robillard, Sean Jones, Walter Beasley, Steve Swallow. Something Came from Baltimore is a jazz, blues, and R&B podcast and radio show, and it's not really about Baltimore. Subscribe to the podcast and listen to your favorite artist or future favorite artist. That's Something Came from Baltimore. And be a part of that Be More music scene. Joe Lovano, Jeff Coffin, Paula Cole, Danuzo Makatani, Ann Passio, Ches Smith, Thumbscroll, mostly.
Hi, jazz fans. This is the founder and host of Neon Jazz, Joe Domino. It's both a weekly radio show and interviews with musicians from all over the world, like the Netherlands, New York City, and back to Kansas City, the home of Neon Jazz, covering the rich history and modern world of jazz in a fresh way, featuring interviews with the likes of Arturo Sandoval, Sonny Rollins, Maria Schneider, and countless others. Find our weekly show on Mixcloud. Subscribe to the interviews via iTunes and YouTube. We are Neon Jazz.
Same difference. 2 jazz fans, 1 jazz standard. A review of a single jazz standard through music, history, and stories. And this is AJ.
And this is Johnny.
If you are a jazz fan and you like jazz standards, bebop, show tunes, ballads, you name it.
Yeah, we've got them here. We drop a new show on you every other week, and we take a standard and we listen to a few different versions of it.
Same difference.
Come join the fun.
Looking forward to seeing you.